They say a Marine never panics. That discipline, that iron composure, it gets drilled into your bones. But nothing in my 20 years of service prepared me for the cold cuffs around my wrists in front of a county courthouse. My name's Marcus Holloway. Former Marine Corps Gunnery Sergeant. Scout Sniper. Bronze Star with Valor. I've served on 5 continents and returned home with more ghosts than friends. But last Tuesday, I was treated like a criminal in my own country. It started simple enough, jury duty. I showed up early, clean cut, wearing a dark gray suit. I even parked legally. But before I could get through security, 2 officers approached, one already loosening his cuffs. "You match the description," one of them said. "What description?" I asked. They didn't answer. Didn't explain. Didn't read me my rights. Just took my phone, shoved me against the wall, and cuffed me. I heard murmurs around the lobby. Phones recording. Some whispers of, "Are you serious?" from the onlookers. But no one stepped in. I kept calm. That's what they taught us: control your breathing, assess, wait for the window. But in this case, the window wasn't mine to find. They marched me straight into the courtroom, wrists bound, as if I was some threat to public safety. The bailiff barely looked up. The judge was already preparing the docket. Then the double doors creaked open. And in stepped someone who turned the entire room to stone. A 4-star general. Full service uniform. Shoulders squared. Presence like thunder in the silence. People sat straighter. Phones were lowered. Even the judge blinked twice. And for the first time since I was detained, I saw a glimmer of truth in their eyes. They'd made a mistake. A very big one. The general's name was unmistakable: General Alan R. Greaves, commander of U.S. Forces Pacific. I had seen him once, from a distance, during a commendation ceremony in Okinawa. I never imagined he'd be standing in a civilian courthouse, for me. His boots echoed across the marble floor with a rhythm that silenced every whisper. No escort. No introduction. Just gravity. He walked past the defense tables, the prosecutors, even the judge. Then he turned, square in front of me, and gave a sharp salute. To Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Holloway, he said loud enough for the back row to hear. "This man has saved American lives. He does not belong in restraints." A murmur of confusion and disbelief rippled through the room. The arresting officers stiffened. One even took a nervous half-step back. The judge cleared her throat. "General, may I ask, what is your purpose here today?" "My purpose," he said, eyes never leaving mine, "is to correct a disgraceful mistake before this court proceeds another second." He turned to the bench, his ribbons catching the light. Gunnery Sergeant Holloway is a decorated Marine. He was invited here by me, personally, to consult on a federal security case. Instead, he was profiled, detained without charge, and paraded into this courtroom in handcuffs. That word, profiled, hung in the air like smoke. No one said it out loud, but we all knew what he meant. The judge looked stunned. "Are you confirming, General, that this man was detained in error?" "I am confirming," he replied, "that he should be receiving a commendation, not an apology. But we'll start with the apology." He stepped aside and faced the officers. "I expect those cuffs off now." The officers moved quickly. Hands shaking. Keys fumbling. As the cold steel came off my wrists, I looked around. No one could meet my gaze, except the general. He didn't blink. He didn't look away. He simply nodded. "Welcome home, Marine." The courtroom stayed frozen for a moment after the general's words. You could feel it, the tension shifting. Every person in that room knew something had gone horribly wrong, and now the weight of that mistake was pressing down like a storm front. I flexed my wrists as the cuffs dropped to the floor with a sharp metallic clink. Red lines etched into my skin where they'd dug in. The judge looked at them, then at me, then finally at the officers who dragged me in. "You may be seated, Mr. Holloway," she said, voice faltering slightly. "And, my sincerest apologies for what you've endured." I didn't move. I wasn't ready to sit. Not yet. General Greaves turned toward the bench. "With your permission, Your Honor, I'd like to address the court further." "Granted," she replied, almost relieved to hand over the floor. The general stepped forward and pulled a folded document from his uniform coat. He unfolded it carefully and placed it on the table like a sacred text. "This," he said, "is a letter of appointment, signed by the Deputy Secretary of Defense. Gunnery Sergeant Holloway was asked to assist with a high-level threat analysis as a civilian consultant. His expertise is unmatched in urban threat scenarios. The fact that he was arrested, publicly humiliated, and nearly processed as a suspect before anyone checked his identity is not just an embarrassment, it is a failure." You could feel it then, the eyes shifting. People in the courtroom realizing they hadn't just watched a misstep. They'd been part of it. The gasps. The recording phones. The silence. The judge nodded slowly. "General, this court was unaware of Mr. Holloway's assignment. I assure you, this is not standard procedure." He didn't flinch. "I hope not. Because if it is, we have a much deeper problem than I thought." He looked back at me. "Marcus, I didn't come here just to undo what they did. I came here to make sure this never happens again." I finally spoke. "Sir, with respect, it already has. I've seen it happen. I just didn't think I'd be the one next." He nodded, his expression grave. "And that's why this won't end here." The courtroom felt more like a press room now. The back benches were packed with people on their phones, texting, recording, whispering. Someone must have tipped off the local media, because I saw 2 reporters rush in through the side door, cameras in hand. General Greaves motioned to the clerk. "I'd like this statement entered into the court record." The clerk nodded and accepted the letter. The judge sat straighter, her demeanor shifting into something more formal, maybe even defensive. "As this court reviews the complaint and its implications," she said, "I'll order a temporary recess while we verify the chain of events surrounding Mr. Holloway's detainment." Before she could reach for the gavel, the general raised his voice one last time. "With respect, Your Honor, verification isn't needed. What happened today was witnessed. It was filmed. It was felt. I'm not asking for a delay. I'm demanding accountability." That word hit the room hard. Accountability. It wasn't just about me anymore. I looked over at the 2 officers who detained me. One of them was staring at the floor. The other kept his arms folded, jaw tight. He hadn't said a word since the general walked in. I finally broke the silence. "Why'd you pick me?" The younger officer glanced up. "You matched the description. Black male. Gray suit. That's half this courthouse," I said flatly. "You didn't ask for ID. You didn't ask my name. You saw someone who fit your assumption and you acted." He opened his mouth like he might argue, but no words came. The general turned to the judge. "I will be filing a formal inquiry with the Department of Justice. Internal Affairs can handle what happens next here. But I guarantee this, Sergeant Holloway will not walk out of this courtroom carrying someone else's mistake." The judge gave a short nod. "Understood." Then, unexpectedly, she stood. "Mr. Holloway, you're free to go. If you'd like to remain and file an official statement, the court will support it. Otherwise, this session is recessed, effective immediately." And just like that, the room stirred. The cuffs were off. But the memory of them? That would take longer to shake. I walked out without looking back. But I could feel their eyes on me. Every one of them. Because they knew what I knew, this wasn't just about justice. It was about the next time. Outside the courthouse, the sky had darkened, and a slow drizzle began to fall. I stood beneath the awning, watching raindrops tap against the sidewalk like a slow ticking clock. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted my name. People stared. But I wasn't ready to speak. Not yet. General Greaves came up beside me. His voice was quiet, but firm. I want you to understand something, Marcus. What happened in there? That wasn't a fluke. That was the system showing you what it's built to do when no one's watching. I nodded, jaw tight. And this time, someone was. He looked at me sideways. What about next time? I exhaled slowly. I'm not just walking away from this. The general handed me a manila envelope. Inside is a copy of the official letter of complaint I'm submitting. Your name is on it. So is mine. We're going to make noise. I took it. Noise is good. But change is better. That's when a woman approached, maybe in her 50s, gray cardigan, umbrella in hand. She hesitated, then reached out. I saw what happened in there, she said softly. I just wanted to say. I'm sorry. I didn't do anything. I should have said something. Her voice cracked at the end, like the weight of her silence had finally caught up to her. I shook my head. You're saying something now. She nodded, eyes misty. There shouldn't have to be a general for people to believe a Marine. That line stuck with me. Because she was right. I hadn't done anything wrong. I'd served my country. Risked everything. And still, one assumption, one glance, one moment, and I was just another suspect. I looked down at my hands, still red from the cuffs. And I knew the apology, the headlines, the public outcry, it was all noise unless it led to something real. I looked at the general. Let's do more than just fix this. Let's make sure it doesn't happen again. He gave a sharp nod. Then let's get to work, Marine. 2 days later, I found myself standing on the steps of the Pentagon. Not in uniform. Not with a rifle. This time, I had a folder full of testimony, surveillance stills from that courtroom, and a letter of endorsement signed by General Allen R. Greaves. We weren't there to settle a score, we were there to lay a foundation. The meeting inside was with the Oversight Subcommittee on Federal Civil Liberties. I gave them the truth, plain and unvarnished. Every moment from the courthouse lobby to the cuffs, to the look in that officer's eyes when he decided I was close enough to a suspect description. No accusations. Just facts. Because that's all it took. The facts told their own story, that training doesn't mean immunity, and discipline doesn't stop a misjudgment. That no matter your service, your medals, your record, sometimes, someone else's fear rewrites your identity. But we were rewriting something too. The general proposed a policy overhaul, mandatory ID verification before detainment for all civilian consultants and active military personnel appearing under appointment orders. More oversight for courthouse security protocols. Bias training for officers. Accountability measures for field detainments. It wasn't glamorous. But it was real. A month later, the first changes were implemented statewide. 2 more states adopted the protocol the following quarter. Officers at the courthouse were quietly reassigned. No headlines. Just files moved. But change often starts quietly. I kept the manila envelope the general gave me. It's on my desk now. Beside it is a photo, me, standing on those Pentagon steps, suit sharp, shoulders back, cuffs long gone. Sometimes I still get stopped. But now, when they see my name, there's a flag next to it. Not for threat status. But for decorated veteran, cleared access. And I make sure every officer who looks at that flag sees something else too, that what happened to me won't happen again quietly. Because some of us came back not just to serve, but to protect the next one in line. A few weeks after the Pentagon hearing, something unexpected happened. I started getting letters. Not emails. Not texts. Actual handwritten letters, some from other veterans, some from civilians who had seen the courtroom footage online. A retired Air Force pilot from Kansas. A young black college student in Michigan. Even a court clerk from Missouri who said, "What happened to you made me change how I look at every case file that crosses my desk." They weren't just messages of support. They were admissions. Stories of moments people had looked the other way, or had been the one looked at differently. One letter stood out. It was from a young Marine recruit stationed at Paris Island. He wrote, "I was ready to quit. Didn't think I belonged. Then I saw what you did, not just standing up in court, but staying calm, holding your ground. You didn't just prove them wrong, you showed us how to move forward without burning it all down. You gave me a reason to stay." That one hit deep. Because the truth was, part of me had wanted to burn it down. That helpless rage still flared up sometimes, in quiet moments, in hallways that echoed too much like that courthouse lobby. But hearing that my experience helped someone stay in the fight, that gave the whole thing weight. A few months later, I was invited to speak at the National Security Symposium in D.C. It wasn't a flashy event. No cameras. Just military officers, intelligence advisors, a few senators in tailored suits. I told them what happened. Not for pity, not for applause, but to remind them that every system, no matter how structured, is vulnerable to assumptions. That honor doesn't shield you from judgment, but integrity means confronting it head-on. Afterward, a colonel approached me and said something I'll never forget: "Your story didn't just challenge the system, it humbled it." And that was it. Not revenge. Not punishment. But humility. That's how change really begins. It was a quiet evening when I got the call. No reporters. No cameras. Just me, a cup of coffee, and the buzz of a muted television. The name on the screen read, Greaves. I answered immediately. "Gunnery Sergeant," the general said, voice steady as ever. "We're expanding the program." I leaned forward. "You mean the policy initiative?" "No. I mean you. We're launching a new advisory task force, military veterans helping shape justice reform and civilian response protocols. Your name's already at the top." I didn't answer right away. My eyes scanned the room, the medals in the shadow box, the envelope still tucked on my bookshelf, the scuff marks from boots that had walked through more dirt than most people would know. He continued, "You'll be speaking with lawmakers. Training officers. Sitting with people who never imagined a Marine sniper would be the one explaining where the system cracks." I nodded slowly. "And we're doing it right. Not just a patch job." "No patches," he said. "Structural rebuild. From the inside." I looked out the window. A car passed, headlights gliding across the walls like slow searchlights. "Then I'm in," I said. "Good," the general replied. "We need men like you where it counts." That night, I didn't sleep much. Not because of what had happened. But because of what was coming next. The real mission had just begun, not on a battlefield, not behind a scope, but in conference rooms, police academies, and policy sessions. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was just surviving. I felt like I was leading. A year later, I walked back into that same courthouse. Not in cuffs. Not in silence. This time, I was the keynote speaker for a statewide judicial training summit. They asked me to speak about procedural integrity, veteran reintegration, and how the justice system could better distinguish between threat and misunderstanding. But really, they wanted a story. So I gave them mine. I didn't sugarcoat it. I told them about the lobby. The cuffs. The silence. The fear that maybe everything I had done, all the sacrifice, all the service, meant nothing in the wrong set of eyes. But then I told them about the moment it all shifted. When one man walked into a courtroom not to save me, but to stand with me. I looked into the crowd of judges, officers, policymakers, and said, the only reason I'm standing here today, not in bitterness but in purpose, is because someone in power chose not to be silent. He didn't fix the system in one day. But he opened the door. So now it's our job, to make sure that door never closes again. When I stepped down from the podium, there was no applause at first. Just stillness. And then someone stood. Then another. And then the room followed, one by one, rising not for me, but for what they knew had to change. Afterwards, a young officer approached me outside. She looked barely 25, badge new, face nervous. She said, I wasn't on duty that day, but I watched the footage 100 times. I joined the force to protect people. Not to repeat mistakes. You reminded me why I'm here. That was the moment it came full circle. Because this journey didn't end in a courtroom. It began there. And now, I walk through doors I used to fear. I speak in rooms I once thought were off limits. I carry not just the scars, but the blueprint for something better. They detained a Marine. But they awakened a leader. Months passed. The headlines faded. The cameras moved on. But the work didn't stop. By the time the anniversary of that courtroom day came around, our task force had trained over 3,000 officers across 6 states. We'd helped draft 2 federal amendments tied to veteran identification during law enforcement encounters. We'd sat with chiefs of police, court administrators, and elected officials who'd once believed the system only needed adjustments. Now they knew better. Change wasn't about tweaking the surface, it was about reworking the foundation. And still, I kept hearing that same question. Why keep going? The answer. Because every time I walk into a training room and lock eyes with a young recruit who reminds me of who I was, disciplined, committed, but unsure if the world would ever see past the uniform, I know the mission still matters. And every time a veteran emails me, saying, I thought it was just me, I know this fight is bigger than any one courtroom. A few weeks ago, I was invited to speak at a high school JROTC banquet. Bunch of kids in pressed uniforms, sitting straighter than most adults. At the end of my talk, one of them, a quiet kid in the back with polished boots and wide eyes, asked, Sir, do you ever regret it? I didn't even have to think. No, I said. Because regret is wishing you could go back. And I don't want to go back. I want to build forward. That day they put cuffs on me, they didn't end my story, they just changed its purpose. He nodded, quiet and focused. And in that moment, I saw it, the next leader. The next voice that wouldn't need a general to walk in and speak up for him. He'd speak for himself. Because we were building more than policies. We were building a generation that knew its worth, before anyone tried to take it from them. And that's the legacy. Not mine. Ours.